Anyone who builds things for a living knows the feeling of the sudden squeeze. You map out a 14-week project plan, tight but doable, and then, without warning, the client moves the launch date up by 3 full weeks. When panic sets in, management usually reaches for fast-tracking. Traditionally, this means scouring the project timeline to find every single phase that could theoretically run in parallel, then overlapping them to hit the new date. In a recent hardware-software rollout for a client called Branix Systems, the project manager applied this exact logic. They ran the finishing touches of the design phase alongside the early build, and they started testing software modules before the build phase had officially wrapped. This chart shows the result, a plan that looks like a complete victory. You can see the original sequential 14-week timeline on top, seamlessly compressed down to an 11-week target on the bottom. No scope was cut, no extra headcount was added. Presenting a clean, shrunken timeline like this creates a powerful illusion of efficiency. It tricks everyone into believing you've found free time, when in reality, you've just masked a series of uncalculated dangers. The data shows how often this illusion breaks. Take a look at the center statistic here. 46% of fast-tracked schedules experience a volume of rework that completely erases any time they supposedly saved. For the Branix project, the breaking point arrived 3 weeks in. The testing team suddenly started flagging a surge of defects in the early software modules. These weren't standard bugs. Because the build phase hadn't actually finished, the modules were still quietly changing. The foundation the testers were working on was shifting beneath them, rendering their results obsolete as soon as they were recorded. The final math was disastrous. If we check the project's actual outcome on the left, you'll see that a 14-week schedule squeezed into an 11-week target ultimately exploded into a 19-week nightmare. It raises a difficult question. How does a mathematical attempt to save 3 weeks result in a structural collapse that costs you an extra 5? The failure at Branix traces back to treating fast-tracking as a visual scheduling technique, moving bars leftward to shrink a timeline, rather than a risk transaction. Planners routinely assume that because tasks are not technically blocked from running together, they are safe to run together. But overlapping them creates a hidden, pulsing dependency between the two. This engineers a rework loop. When you start a downstream task based on an upstream input that is only close enough, any late change instantly triggers an error cascade, forcing a reset. The effort required to fix it multiplies. A single defect demands a manual fix, a full retest, and re-verification of everything downstream. Each cycle pushes the deadline further out. Overlapping dependent phases without an explicit risk plan actively builds a compounding error trap into the heart of the project. The recovery of the Branix project began when a senior delivery lead reviewed the ruined schedule and asked one devastating question. Which of these overlaps are you willing to redo if they fail? The manager realized they had no answer. They had prioritized technical possibility over schedule wisdom, never pricing the cost of failure before making the trade. Fast-tracking functions like a high-interest loan taken out against an unplanned future. If you haven't calculated the interest rate, you're just gambling that the debt won't come due. After the Branix failure, the team codified their hard-earned lessons into an underwriting process designed to ensure compressed projects don't go bankrupt. They call it the F.A.S.T method. Focus requires you to compress only the true critical path, the sequence that actually determines the end date. Overlapping non-critical work adds risk for free while saving you 0 time. Accept risk knowingly. You must name exactly what could go wrong in each overlap before committing to it, and decide deliberately whether that specific risk is worth the time you hope to save. Sequence the overlap deliberately. This means writing down a concrete threshold for what stable enough to start actually looks like. It removes the close enough judgment calls that lead to downstream contamination. Finally, track daily. Compressed timelines have no slack to absorb a week of silence. You check every active overlap point every single day until it's proven stable. This framework shifts the manager's role. They stop moving bars on a screen and start acting as an underwriter of project risk. Applying these disciplines changes the structure of the final plan. Instead of assuming 0 friction, you build in an explicit rework buffer, sized specifically to the risks you've knowingly accepted. You also preserve a safety valve by keeping at least one overlap reversible, allowing you to fall back to sequential execution if the daily check-ins start flashing red. When the Brannix team applied these specific moves to their later projects, the hard results followed. This panel shows a 63% reduction in rework triggered by overlapping phases. This requires a harder conversation with the client up front. You can no longer present compression as a clean victory. You have to present it as a specific named trade, time for risk, that everyone has agreed to. Borrowed time always comes due. If your next fast-tracked plan doesn't have a named risk attached to every overlap, you aren't being efficient. You're just waiting for the rework loop to happen.